The sound of weights hitting the floor echoed through the empty gym when I first saw Derek take off his military uniform. It was 2:15 in the morning, and I was there, pretending to organize towels, but really watching his every move through the reflection in the mirrors. When he turned and looked directly at me with that intensity I already knew, he whispered the words that would change everything between us. "If you can handle this, I'll make you mine." In that moment, I had no idea that phrase carried a lot more weight than I imagined. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. My name is Marcus. I'm 22 years old, and I've been working the overnight shift at the Fit Zone gym for almost a year. Taking this job was a purely financial decision. I needed the money to pay for my business administration degree and the bills for my tiny apartment. What I didn't expect was how this job would become my refuge after the most toxic relationship of my life ended. Chase and I broke up 3 months ago, after a 2-year relationship that left me questioning my own sanity. He had a gift for making me doubt everything. My perceptions, my decisions, even my ability to exist without him. When I finally found the courage to end things, I thought it would be liberating. What I hadn't calculated was how hard he would resist letting me go. The gym became my sanctuary because here, between 2 and 6 in the morning, the world seemed suspended. It was just me, a few humming machines, and occasionally some insomniac looking for endorphins to help them sleep. It was a controlled environment where I could rebuild my self-esteem without judgmental stares or uncomfortable questions about why I'd changed so much in recent months. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check the link in the description right now. Working alone gave me time to process everything that had happened. I cleaned the equipment on autopilot while my mind revisited conversations, trying to understand where I had lost so much of myself in the process of loving someone. The repetitive routine was almost meditative, organizing weights in ascending order, sanitizing surfaces, checking that all the machines were working perfectly. If you want to enjoy this video and subscribe to the channel, because believe me, this story will show you how sometimes the most improbable situations can lead us exactly where we need to be. The Fit Zone gym is on the 22nd floor of a commercial building in downtown Los Angeles. During the day, it's busy. Executives sweating out their frustrations before important meetings, influencers recording content for social media, groups of friends who turn workouts into social gatherings. But after midnight, everything changes. The lights get softer, the air conditioning works on silent mode, and the place takes on an almost cinematic atmosphere. The mirrors that cover all the walls reflect infinitely during the day, creating a sense of a crowd even when you're alone. At night, they become portals for discreet observation. I can see every corner of the gym without having to turn my head, a skill I developed in my first months on the job, and which has proven especially useful recently. The distinctive smell of the place is an interesting mix. Rubber from the equipment, the lavender-scented cleaning products I use religiously, and a light metallic essence from the weights. During the first few weeks, that smell bothered me, but now it's become comforting, like the scent of home. My routine always started the same way. I'd arrive at 10 p.m., when the previous shift employee was eager to leave. I'd do a full round, checking if all the equipment was working, if any members had forgotten anything, if the towels were properly stocked. Between midnight and 1 a.m., the foot traffic would drop off drastically. It was in this period of silence that I really started my work. I'd put on my personal playlist, a mix of indie rock and electronic music that created the perfect soundtrack for productive solitude. I'd start with the cardio section, meticulously cleaning each treadmill, adjusting the incline to 0, checking that the monitors were working. Then I'd move on to the free weights, my favorite part. There was something almost zen about organizing dumbbells in ascending order, making sure each bar was in the correct position, that the plates were stacked by weight. It was a job that required attention, but allowed my mind to wander. During these moments of contemplation, I'd process fragments of my relationship with Chase. I'd remember how he questioned my career choices, saying that working at the gym was unambitious for someone studying business administration. How he'd make comments about my appearance in a way that seemed like caring, but was actually disguised control. The night regulars were few, but fascinating. There was Sandra, a nurse who worked 12-hour shifts and came to decompress at 3 in the morning. Always friendly, but she respected my space. James, a programmer who suffered from chronic insomnia and found exercise was the only way to get tired enough to sleep, and a few other familiar faces who'd show up sporadically. They all shared one characteristic. They preferred solitude to the social environments of conventional hours. This created an atmosphere of mutual respect. No one asked personal questions. No one tried to force conversations. It was a peaceful coexistence that helped me rebuild my confidence in human interactions. It was on an especially quiet Tuesday that everything started to change. It was 2:15 a.m. when I noticed a new figure in the gym. Tall, probably 6'1", with broad shoulders that filled his black t-shirt almost obscenely. He was using the equipment differently from the other regulars. While most people arrived with headphones on and followed mechanical routines, this man moved with deliberate purpose. Each exercise was executed with military precision, literally, as I would find out later. There was no hurry, but also no wasted time. He was efficiency in motion. What most caught my attention was his posture. Even relaxed, there was something alert about him, as if he were constantly evaluating the environment. His eyes did regular scans of the space, not in a paranoid way, but professionally. It was like watching a predator in its natural habitat, confident, but never inattentive. When he approached the front desk, I could see details that had gone unnoticed from a distance. Large hands with several small scars, the kind that come from intensive training or real-life situations. His hair was cut in a military style, but already grown out enough to suggest he wasn't on active duty at the moment. "Sorry to bother you," he said in a low, controlled voice. "Can you explain how to adjust this equipment for shoulder rehab?" He pointed to one of the most complex machines, the one most regulars avoided because they didn't understand how it worked. His voice had a hypnotic quality, deep but not forced. There was a slight accent I couldn't immediately identify. When our eyes met, I felt an intensity that made me hesitate for a moment. It wasn't aggression, but a form of attention I'd never experienced before. "Sure, no problem," I replied, trying to keep my tone professional. As we walked to the equipment, I noticed he was limping slightly on his right side. It wasn't obvious, but my trained eye for observing people in the gym caught the subtle compensation. I explained the necessary adjustments for different types of injuries, demonstrating the correct movements. He absorbed every piece of information with total attention, asking specific questions that revealed prior knowledge of anatomy and physical recovery. They weren't the typical questions of a beginner. "Have you worked in rehab before?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Something like that," he replied with a half-smile that didn't give much away. "Learned a few things about recovering from injuries over the years." The conversation flowed naturally, but there were layers of information he clearly wasn't willing to share. This intrigued me more than it should have. After months of a relationship with someone who shared every unfiltered thought, this man's controlled reserve was refreshing. When he finished his workout, he approached the front desk again. "Thanks for the help. I'm Derek, by the way." "Marcus," I replied, realizing my voice came out softer than normal. "Marcus," he repeated, as if testing how my name sounded in his voice. "Do you always work this shift?" "Monday to Friday, from 10 to 6. "Perfect. We'll probably see each other around then." After Derek left, I was left with a strange feeling. It wasn't discomfort, but a kind of energy I hadn't felt in months. There was something about him that sparked curiosity and, if I was honest with myself, an attraction I'd rather not analyze too deeply at that moment. In the following days, Derek showed up regularly, always between 2 and 3 in the morning, always focused on his workout, always polite, but reserved. We started exchanging more words, comments about equipment, observations about the quiet of the night shift. Nothing too personal. It was during the second week that he brought coffee. "Thought you might want some," he said, placing a thermal mug on the counter. "Looks like you like strong coffee." I was surprised not just by the gesture, but by the observation. I really did drink strong coffee during my shift, but I didn't think anyone had noticed. This meant Derek was observing me more than I had realized. The coffee was perfect, strong, but not bitter, with a note of vanilla that made it special. "Where'd you get this?" I asked. "Actually, I made it," he replied with that half-smile I was starting to recognize. "One of the few useful skills I developed outside of work." "And what would that work be?" I tried, hoping he would finally reveal more about himself. "Security," he answered vaguely. Nothing too exciting. But the way he said it, along with his posture and sharp observations, suggested that security was a very simplified description of reality. I decided not to push it. If I had learned anything from Chase, it was that forcing information only created resistance. Derek started bringing coffee regularly. I'd reciprocate with workout tips, suggestions for less busy times for certain equipment, small favors I made a point of offering. It was a balanced exchange that was gradually building something akin to friendship. During the third week, I realized that Derek wasn't just observant. He was genuinely interested in me as a person. He'd ask questions about my college, about my future plans, about how I had chosen to work that shift. His questions were always respectful, never invasive. It was then that I started to notice details about him too. The scars on his hands were more extensive than I had initially imagined. There was a mark on the back of his neck that looked like a burn. When he'd stretch his arm to reach high equipment, I could see part of a tattoo on his shoulder that looked military. More importantly, I realized that Derek had the same carefulness I did in avoiding crowds and noise. When someone more sociable eventually appeared in the gym, he would retreat, keeping his distance. It was as if he valued the same kind of peace I sought in that environment. One night, while I was organizing the weights after his workout, Derek commented, "You like the quiet." It wasn't a question, but an observation. "Yeah," I replied. "You do too." "It's easier to think when there are no distractions," he said. And for the first time, I heard a slight vulnerability in his voice. "Sometimes thinking too much is the problem," I answered without filtering, surprising myself with the honesty. Derek stopped what he was doing and looked directly at me. "You're recovering from something too." Again, it wasn't a question. It was as if he had the ability to read things in people that they tried to hide. I felt a lump in my throat because no one had noticed this before. Everyone around me assumed I was fine, that I'd gotten over the previous relationship without any major consequences. "Something like that," I used his own words, and he smiled. Not the usual controlled half-smile, but a genuine smile that completely transformed his expression. It was in that moment that I realized Derek and I had more in common than a preference for alternative hours. We were both dealing with some kind of recovery, we both valued personal space, we both found a kind of silent therapy in the empty gym. But it was also when I started to realize that something more was growing between us. The way he moved through the space when I was present was different from when he was alone. The attention he paid to my words went beyond basic courtesy. And, if I was completely honest, the way my heart sped up when I saw him arrive every night was becoming impossible to ignore. However, something started to bother me in a subtle way. Small things that I initially attributed to coincidence, but that gradually formed a pattern. Items in my apartment that seemed out of place. The feeling of being watched during the day. Strange messages on social media from accounts I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was paranoia resulting from the messy breakup with Chase. He had shown difficulty in accepting the end of the relationship, calling persistently, showing up at places I frequented. But after a few weeks of silence, I had assumed he had moved on. Now, though, the signs were coming back more intensely. And for the first time, I was afraid they weren't just coincidences. It was on a Thursday that everything changed between Derek and me. It was already almost 3 in the morning, and the gym was quieter than normal. Even Sandra hadn't shown up that night. I was trying to stick to my routine, but my mind couldn't focus. All week, the feeling of being watched had intensified in a frightening way. The Tuesday before, I had found my apartment door ajar when I got home from work. Nothing had been stolen, but some objects were clearly out of place. The mug I always left in the sink was on the kitchen table. The TV remote, which I always kept on the left arm of the couch, was on the right. Small details that any normal person would ignore, but that for me represented a clear invasion of my privacy. Derek noticed my agitation immediately. During his workout, I noticed he was watching me through the mirrors more frequently than normal, as if he were monitoring my emotional state. When he finished his exercises, he didn't go straight home like he always did. He stayed, organizing equipment he hadn't used, clearly creating an excuse to stay longer. "Marcus," he said finally, approaching the front desk, "can I talk to you for a minute?" There was something different in his tone. The controlled casualness was gone, replaced by a seriousness that made me stop what I was doing completely. "Of course," I replied, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. Derek looked around the gym, checking that we were completely alone, before continuing. "Have you noticed anything strange lately? People following you? Objects out of place? A feeling of being watched?" My blood ran cold. How could he know that? "Why are you asking?" I managed to say after a moment of silence. "Because I have noticed," he replied with a frankness that caught me off guard. 3 weeks ago, I noticed patterns of surveillance around this building. Someone has been watching your hours, your routine. Initially, I thought it was a coincidence, but the signs have become too obvious to ignore. I felt like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. "You've been watching me?" I asked, trying to process if Derek was a protection or an additional threat. "Not in the way you're thinking," he said quickly. "My job taught me to recognize when someone is being watched, and you definitely are." The word job echoed in my mind. For weeks, Derek had been vague about his profession, saying only that he worked in security. Now, watching his alert posture and the way his eyes constantly scanned the environment, I started to understand that security probably meant something much more complex. "What kind of work exactly do you do?" I asked. Derek hesitated for a moment, as if he was calculating how much he could reveal. "I work in military intelligence. I'm currently with a private security company, but my background is in reconnaissance and surveillance. I know how to recognize when someone is being monitored, because I've done it professionally." The revelation hit me like a punch. All this time, Derek wasn't just a casual night gym goer. He was someone with specific training to detect exactly the kind of situation I was experiencing. "And you didn't think it was important to mention this before?" I asked, feeling a mix of relief and betrayal. "I didn't want to scare you unnecessarily," he replied. "But the situation is escalating. This afternoon, I saw the same car parked on the street outside the building 3 times at different hours." The days following our confrontation were the most intense of my life. Derek had become a constant presence, arriving earlier and leaving later, always with a plausible excuse to be around. I knew he was protecting me, but the tension between us had turned into something almost unbearable. It was a Friday when everything blew up. I was organizing the towels in the locker room when I heard Derek yell my name from outside. It wasn't the controlled tone I knew. It was pure urgency, the kind of voice that makes your body react even before your mind processes the danger. I ran out and saw Derek near the gym entrance, in a posture I had never seen before. All pretense of casualness had vanished. He was completely in military mode, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the glass door that led to the hallway. "Marcus, I need you to go to the locker room now and lock the door," he said without taking his eyes off the entrance. "What's happening?" I asked, but my voice came out more like a whisper. "Chase is here, and he has something in his hand." My world collapsed in that moment. For weeks, Derek had mentioned signs of surveillance, but a part of me still hoped they were just coincidences. Now, confronted with the reality that Chase had escalated his actions to the point of physically appearing at my workplace, I felt a fear I had never experienced before. "Go now," Derek repeated, firmer this time, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, watching Derek position himself between me and the door. For the first time, I could see completely who he really was. He wasn't just someone with military training. He was a natural protector, someone whose first reaction to danger was to put himself on the front line to protect others. The hallway door opened slowly. Chase appeared, and my stomach churned at the sight of him. He had lost weight, had deep, dark circles under his eyes, and an expression that wavered between despair and anger. In his right hand, he held something he kept partially hidden behind his body. "Marcus," Chase said, as if Derek didn't even exist. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I managed to reply, finding a strength in my voice that surprised me. "Of course there is," Chase continued, taking a step inside the gym. "You disappeared from my life without explanation. You changed your number. You don't answer my messages. That's not fair." Derek moved slightly to the side, completely blocking the line of sight between Chase and me. "You need to leave. Now." It was then that Chase finally recognized Derek as a threat. "Who are you to get between me and my boyfriend?" "Ex-boyfriend," I corrected, and the word came out with more firmness than I expected. Chase's expression turned into something that made me instinctively recoil. It was a mix of pain and fury that I recognized from the worst moments of our relationship. "You think you can replace me just like that?" he said, pointing at Derek. 2 years, Marcus. Do 2 years of our lives together mean nothing?" "They meant a lot," I replied, and I realized I could finally talk about our relationship without feeling guilty. "But you turned those 2 years into something toxic, and I'm not going back to that." That's when Chase completely showed what he was holding. It was a knife. Not very big, but definitely a weapon. "You're coming home with me. Now." Derek moved with a speed my eyes could barely keep up with. In seconds, he had disarmed Chase and pinned him against the floor. It wasn't unnecessarily violent, but it was definitive. Chase screamed, more from frustration than pain, trying to struggle against Derek's iron control. "Marcus, call the police," Derek said calmly, as if he were asking me to get a towel. But as I dialed, I noticed something in Derek's eyes that made me hesitate. It wasn't anger or aggression. It was a cold, calculated determination. It was as if he was making calculations about the best way to resolve the situation permanently. "Derek," I said softly, "the police are already coming." He looked at me and nodded, but kept Chase pinned down until we heard the sirens approaching. When the police arrived, Derek explained the situation clearly and concisely, providing details about the weeks of surveillance he had documented. Chase was taken into custody, still yelling threats and promises that he would be back. After everyone left, Derek and I were alone in the gym for the first time since everything had started. The silence was different now. It wasn't the peaceful quiet we used to share, but a tension heavy with adrenaline and unprocessed emotions. "Thank you," I said finally. Derek just nodded, but I realized something had changed in him. The forced closeness of the last few weeks, combined with the intensity of the confrontation, had removed all the carefully built barriers between us. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked, and for the first time I heard real vulnerability in his voice. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I don't know how to process all this." Derek approached slowly, as if he was moving toward a wounded animal. "Can I stay here tonight, just to make sure you're safe?" I nodded, realizing I didn't want to be alone anyway. The following hours passed in an emotional haze. Derek helped me finish my gym closing tasks, but we were both clearly processing what had happened. It was when we were locking the door that I noticed how close our bodies were, how the tension between us had transformed into something completely different. "Marcus," Derek said my name as if it were a question. When I turned to look at him, I saw that all his defenses were gone. He was no longer the controlled military man or the calculating protector. He was just Derek, vulnerable and intense, looking at me as if I were the only thing that mattered in the world. The kiss happened naturally, as if it were inevitable. Weeks of accumulated tension, the shared fear, the forced intimacy of the situation. Everything culminated in that moment. His hands found my face with a gentleness that completely contrasted with the strength he had shown hours before. We moved to the small office in the back of the gym, away from the windows and exposure. Derek pressed me gently against the wall, his eyes seeking permission with every move. When I nodded, I felt as if I was giving myself completely for the first time in my life. Clothes became unnecessary obstacles. Each piece removed revealed more scars on Derek's body, marks of a life he had shared only in fragments. I traced some with my fingers, and he shivered under my touch, as if he wasn't used to being touched with tenderness. Derek explored me as if he were memorizing every detail, his lips leaving a trail of fire everywhere they went. When we finally came together completely, I felt as if I was being rewritten from the inside out. Every movement was a silent conversation, every touch a promise that I would never be alone again. The climax was intense and liberating, as if all the tensions of the last few weeks were being released simultaneously. We lay intertwined on the office floor, breathing heavily, processing the magnitude of what had happened between us. "This changes everything," I whispered against his chest. "I know," he replied, kissing my hair, "and I want it to change." In the days that followed, Derek had to be away to handle legal issues related to the incident with Chase. I found out he had documented weeks of evidence about the stalking, creating a solid case that would ensure Chase stayed away from me permanently. His absence gave me time to process not only the trauma of what had happened, but also the intensity of the feelings I had developed for Derek. During 2 years with Chase, I had never felt truly protected or valued. In just a few weeks with Derek, I had experienced both in a way that transformed my understanding of what I deserved in a relationship. When Derek returned a week later, he found a different version of me. I was still processing everything, but there was a new determination in the way I moved through the world. I was no longer the insecure guy who constantly questioned his own perception of reality. "Chase isn't going to bother you anymore," was the first thing Derek said. He understood it would be better to disappear completely. I didn't ask for details about how exactly Derek had ensured this, but the certainty in his voice completely reassured me. "And us?" I asked. "What happens to us now?" Derek approached, placing his hands on my face with the same gentleness as that night. "Now we build something real, something based on choice, not on need or fear." In the months that followed, Derek and I developed a relationship that defied all my previous experiences. He taught me that protection didn't mean control, that care didn't come with conditions. I learned to value not only my physical safety, but also my emotional autonomy. We continued to meet at the gym during the early morning hours, but now our meetings were a choice, not a coincidence. Derek helped me process the trauma of the previous relationship, while I helped him lower the defenses he had built over years of military work. I discovered that traumatic situations can really lead us to the right people, as long as we're willing to recognize our own worth. Chase had tried to diminish my self-esteem to the point of me accepting any crumb of attention. Derek showed me that I deserved to be protected, respected, and loved unconditionally. The most important thing I learned was that self-love isn't selfishness. It's the fundamental basis for any healthy relationship. When you value yourself, you naturally attract people who also value you. When you accept less than you deserve, you make space for people who will take advantage of that vulnerability. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check the link in the description right now. If this story taught you something about recognizing your own worth in relationships, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. In the comments, tell me if you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between security and emotional vulnerability. And don't miss the next video, where I'll tell you how Derek and I navigated the first few months of this intense relationship, including how we dealt with his military traumas and my recovery from an abusive relationship.